She rejected the Alpha King. The Alpha King is coming for her. He is the most powerful male in the world, and she is the sassy warrior who spat on his claim. She ran, but he hunts. He will find her, he will claim her, and he will make her his queen, even if he has to burn the world down to do it. But before the chase begins, before the obsession ignites, we must understand the vow that set her on this collision course. We must understand Kira. Welcome back, my dear listeners, to another tale of fated mates, forbidden love, and fierce werewolves. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss a single chapter of this intense, supernatural romance. Now let the story begin. The mud was cold and slick beneath Kira's worn boots, the smell of damp earth and pine needles sharp in her nostrils. It was a good smell, honest and unforgiving, unlike the stale, grief-choked air of the pack house. Her knuckles were white around the hilt of her training blade, her breath misting in the early morning chill. She moved with a brutal, practiced grace, dodging the clumsy lunge of a male twice her size, pivoting low, and driving the blunt edge of her weapon into his ribs. He grunted, collapsing into the mire. "Too slow, Torvin," she clipped, her voice low and edged with steel. She didn't offer a hand. Weakness was not tolerated here, least of all from the Alpha's daughter. The Crescent Pack was dying and everyone knew it. Not from a single decisive blow, but from a slow, agonizing rot that started at the top. It started the day her mother, the Luna, was taken by a rogue fever. It started the day her father, the Alpha, stopped being a leader and became a ghost haunting his own halls. His grief was a gaping wound, a vulnerability that rival packs could scent from miles away. The raids were becoming bolder, the skirmishes bloodier. The pack needed a shield, and since her father had dropped his, Kira had picked up the slack. She was 22, with a sharp jawline and eyes the color of storm clouds, and she had traded the expected life of a future Luna for the grueling life of a warrior. She had seen what the mate bond did. It didn't bring strength. It brought dependence. It brought a love so deep that its loss could shatter an Alpha, leaving his people defenseless. She would not be her father. She would not be weak. Later that day, the Alpha called her into his study. The room smelled of old leather and regret. Her father, once a towering figure of command, sat slumped behind his desk, his silver-streaked hair unkempt. "Kira," he said, his voice a tired rasp. "The elders are concerned. You refuse to attend the seasonal gatherings. You refuse to even look at the eligible males." Kira leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms over her chest. "I am concerned too, Father. Concerned that the Shadow Claws are encroaching on the Northwood territory again. Concerned that our warriors are ill-equipped and underfed. My focus is on the pack's survival, not on finding a mate. A mate is survival, child. A strong bond strengthens the Alpha line. It gives us stability." Kira pushed off the frame, taking a step closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "A mate is a liability. I watched it turn you into a shell. I watched your grief invite war to our borders. I watched you become so consumed by loss that you forgot you had a pack to lead." Her words were brutal, but they were the truth she lived by. "I will not end up like you. I will not have a mate. I will be a warrior, and I will protect this pack with my own strength because yours is gone." Her father flinched, the pain in his eyes momentarily eclipsing the exhaustion. Kira felt a familiar cold ache in her chest, but she crushed it. Sentiment was weakness. "I am going on patrol to the Northwood border tonight," she stated, turning to leave. "I suggest you find a way to look like an Alpha before the elders decide to find a new one." She left the study, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The vow settled over her like a second skin. Never a mate, never a weakness. She would be the shield, the sword, the unyielding rock. She would be everything her father was not. She had no idea that the very vow she made, the very strength she cultivated, was about to draw the attention of the one male who could shatter her resolve and claim her soul. The Alpha King, and that by rejecting him, she would not only invite his obsession, but seal the fate of her entire pack. The Northwood border was a jagged line of ancient oaks and treacherous ravines, a place where the shadows seemed to have teeth. Kira moved through the undergrowth like a ghost, her breathing shallow and controlled. Behind her, 4 of her most trusted warriors followed her lead, their scents masked by the bitter tang of crushed wolfsbane and charcoal. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone. A storm was coming, both in the sky and on the ground. A sharp, rhythmic snapping of twigs echoed from the ravine below. Kira raised a hand, and her squad froze instantly. She didn't need to see them to know who it was. The Shadow Claws didn't hunt for food, they hunted for sport, and their scent, a foul mix of wet fur and rot, was unmistakable. "On my signal!" Kira breathed, her voice barely a vibration. She didn't wait for a response. She launched herself from the ridge, a blur of silver-gray fur as she shifted mid-air. Her wolf was smaller than the male's, but she was built for speed and lethality. She slammed into the lead Shadowclaw raider, her jaws locking onto his throat before he could even let out a warning howl. The forest erupted into a chaotic symphony of snarls, the wet thud of bodies hitting the earth, and the frantic scraping of claws against bark. Kira fought with a cold, calculated ferocity. She wasn't just defending a border. She was purging the weakness that had invited this intrusion. She tore through the raiders, her movements a lethal dance of teeth and claws. But as the last of the Shadow Claws turned to flee, a sudden heavy silence fell over the woods. It was a silence that felt physical, a weight that pressed down on the very air. The wind shifted, and then it hit her. It wasn't a scent so much as a physical blow to her soul. It was the smell of lightning, of expensive cedarwood, and a raw, ancient power that made her wolf whine in a way she had never heard before. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with the adrenaline of battle, but with a terrifying magnetic pull that originated deep in her marrow. Kira shifted back to her human form. One of her warriors handed a coat for her to cover up, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she stood amongst the carnage. She looked up, and her blood turned to ice. Standing on the ridge she had just vacated was a group of males, their presence so dominant that the very trees seemed to lean away from them. At their center stood a man who could only be a king. He was tall, his frame draped in dark, heavy furs that did little to hide the sheer muscle beneath. His hair was the color of midnight, and his eyes, gold, piercing, and utterly predatory, were locked onto hers. The air between them hummed with an invisible current. Kira felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a golden thread of connection that tried to bind her heart to his. It was the mate bond. It was the very thing she had vowed to destroy. "You," the male spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated in Kira's very bones. He didn't ask, he stated. He began to descend the ridge, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. His elite guard followed, their eyes wary and respectful. Kira's warriors stepped back, their heads bowing instinctively in the presence of the Alpha King. But Kira stood her ground, her chin tilted up, her eyes flashing with a defiant, sassy fire, even as her inner wolf screamed for her to submit. "Stay back," she spat, the words tasting like copper in her mouth. The king paused, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his handsome, rugged features. No one told the Alpha King to stay back. He took another step, the scent of him now overwhelming, intoxicating, and she could feel his possessiveness reaching out like a physical grip. "I am Kaelen," he said, his gaze intensifying, sweeping over her blood-stained skin and defiant posture. and you are mine." The certainty in his voice ignited a spark of pure, unadulterated rage in Kira. She felt the bond trying to pull her toward him, trying to make her soft, trying to make her like her father. She wouldn't have it. "I am no one's," Kira snarled, her voice cracking with the effort to resist the pull. She looked him dead in the eye, her expression one of utter contempt. "I don't care if you're a king or a god. I reject you, Kaelen. I reject the bond, and I reject you." The silence that followed was deafening. Behind Kaelen, his guards gasped, their hands flying to their weapons. No one rejected the Alpha King. No one survived the insult. Kaelen didn't move. His expression hardened, the gold in his eyes darkening to a stormy amber. The air grew cold, the temperature dropping as his aura expanded, heavy with a possessiveness that felt like a cage. He didn't look angry. He looked obsessed. "You think you have a choice?" he whispered, the sound carrying clearly through the trees. "You are my mate, little warrior, and I have been searching for you for a very long time." He lunged. Kira didn't hesitate. She turned and bolted into the darkness of the Northwood, her heart screaming, her mind a whirlwind of terror and defiance. She had made her vow, and she would keep it, even if it meant being hunted by the most powerful male in existence. The chase had begun. The forest was a blur of jagged branches and stinging needles as Kira tore through the undergrowth in her wolf form. Her paws thundered against the earth, her silver-gray fur a ghost in the moonlight. Behind her, the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots and the terrifyingly silent movement of a predator told her that Kaelen wasn't just following, he was closing in. The air around her felt charged, heavy with the scent of cedar and lightning that seemed to cling to her fur like a physical brand. "You cannot run from the blood, Kira!" Kaelen's voice boomed through the trees, a command that vibrated in the very earth. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Every ounce of her will was focused on the desperate, frantic rhythm of her escape. She reached the edge of the black ravine, a treacherous drop filled with jagged rocks and a churning, icy river. Most wolves would have turned back, but Kira didn't have the luxury of fear. She launched herself into the abyss. She hit the water like a stone, the freezing current instantly numbing her limbs and dragging her under. It was perfect. The water would mask her scent, washing away the traces of the battle and the lingering, intoxicating pull of the king. She fought the current, her claws scraping against the slick riverbed until she found purchase, hauling her sodden wolf body onto a narrow, hidden ledge beneath a heavy curtain of weeping willows. She lay there, shivering, her fur matted and heavy, listening to the sounds above. "Find her!" Kaelen's voice was closer now, edged with a cold, sharp fury. "I want every inch of this forest searched. If a single hair on her head is harmed by your incompetence, I will have your heads." Kira pressed herself deeper into the shadows. She waited until the sounds of the search faded into the distance before she allowed herself to shift. The transition was painful, her bones snapping and skin stretching until she stood on the cold stone, human and completely vulnerable to the elements. She moved with practiced urgency to a hollowed-out crevice behind the willow roots, one of several emergency caches she had hidden along the border months ago. She pulled out a waterproof leather bag. Inside was a set of dark, sturdy warrior leathers, a cloak, and a small wax-sealed pouch. She dressed quickly, her fingers trembling from the cold. Once clothed, she opened the pouch, revealing a mixture of dried hemlock, charcoal, and a rare, pungent root. It was a scent masker, a dangerous concoction that could poison a wolf if used too often, but it was her only hope. She rubbed the bitter paste into her pulse points, the smell of it sharp and unpleasant, effectively burying the faded scent that Kaelen was hunting. She couldn't go back to the pack house. Her father would surrender her in a heartbeat to save his own skin. She was a rogue now. She began to move, not toward the heart of the Packlands, but toward the forbidden boundary, the edge of the human realm. It was a place of noise and a billion competing scents that would act as a natural shield. To a werewolf, the human world was a sensory nightmare, but to Kira, it was a sanctuary. As she reached the final ridge overlooking the distant glowing lights of a human city, she paused. She looked back at the dark silhouette of the Northwood, where the most powerful male in the world was currently tearing the forest apart to find her. "You want a hunt, King?" she whispered, her voice a raspy, defiant thread in the wind. "Then I'll give you one you'll never forget." She stepped over the boundary, the transition from the ancient, magical forest to the cold asphalt reality of the human world feeling like a physical blow. She was alone, she was hunted, and she was a warrior without a pack. But as she disappeared into the neon-lit haze of the city, one thought remained absolute. She would never be claimed. The air in the Northwood didn't just grow cold, it froze. Kaelen stood at the edge of the black ravine, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. The scent of lightning and cedar that usually radiated from him like a calm, steady hum was now a jagged, violent storm. He could still feel the phantom echo of the bond, a golden thread that had been pulled taut until it vibrated with the agony of her distance. "Sire?" a voice ventured from the shadows. It was Silas, his lead tracker, a male who had hunted rogues across 3 continents and never lost a trail. He was kneeling by the riverbank, his expression grim. "The scent, it's gone. The river took her, and the scent masker she used it's high grade." She was prepared for this. Kaelen didn't turn. His eyes were fixed on the churning, icy water below. Prepared to reject her king? Prepared to run from her own soul? His voice was a low, dangerous purr that made Silas flinch. "She is a warrior. She doesn't run out of fear, Silas. She runs out of defiance. She thinks she can break what the Moon Mother has forged." He closed his eyes, reaching out with his internal senses. Usually a fated mate was a beacon, a constant pull in the chest that led one home. But Kira had smothered that beacon. She had buried herself in the stench of hemlock and charcoal, and now, as he looked toward the horizon, he felt the jarring, discordant energy of the human realm. "She went to the city," Kaelen stated, the realization tasting like ash in his mouth. "She chose the filth of the mortals over the throne of the king." "The human realm is vast, sire," Silas cautioned, standing up. "Finding a single wolf who doesn't want to be found, especially one who knows how to hide her scent, could take months. Years." Kaelen finally turned, his gold eyes burning with a terrifying absolute certainty. "Then I will take years. I will take decades. I will tear down every brick of that city if I have to. She is mine, Silas. She was born for me, and I will not allow her to rot in the anonymity of the humans." He began to walk back toward the Crescent Pack border, his elite guard falling into step behind him like shadows. But he wasn't going home. He was going to the pack house. The Crescent Pack's territory felt like a graveyard. The warriors they passed were malnourished, their eyes downcast, their spirits broken. When Kaelen reached the main hall, Kira's father, Alpha Valerius, was waiting, his face a mask of terror. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. "Great King," Valerius stammered, his voice trembling. "My daughter, she is headstrong. She does not understand the honor you bestow upon us. Please, do not hold the pack responsible for her madness." Kaelen looked down at the broken male, a flash of disgust crossing his features. This was what Kira feared. This was the weakness she had vowed to avoid. He saw the resemblance in the Alpha's eyes, the same storm cloud gray as Kira's, but where hers held fire, his held only shadows. Your daughter is not mad, Valerius, Kaelen said, his voice echoing in the silent hall. She is a queen who refuses her crown. And because she has fled, your pack is now under my direct jurisdiction. I will stabilize your borders. I will feed your people. I will turn your warriors into a force that the Shadow Claws will fear to even whisper about. Valerius looked up, hope and confusion warring on his face. You would do this? After her insult? I do this for my mate, Kaelen clipped, his gaze hardening. I will make this pack a home she is proud to return to. And when I find her, and I will find her, she will see that my love is not the cage she thinks it is. It is the power that will restore her legacy. He turned to Silas. Mobilize the urban units. I want every CCTV camera, every dark alley, and every scent trail in that city monitored. She thinks she is a ghost. I will show her that even ghosts leave shadows. As Kaelen walked out into the night, the bond flared once more, a sharp, painful tug in his chest. He looked toward the distant, glowing lights of the human city. He could almost feel her there, sassy and defiant, hiding in the noise. He smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. Run all you want, Kira, he whispered into the wind. The harder you run, the more I will enjoy the catch. The city was a sensory assault that made Kira's inner wolf howl in protest. The air was thick with the stench of exhaust, grease, and the overwhelming, stagnant scent of millions of humans who lived and died without ever knowing the touch of the moon. To Kira, it was a cacophony of noise, the screech of tires, the rhythmic thumping of bass from distant clubs, and the constant, mindless chatter of a species that never stopped talking. But in this chaos, she found her invisibility. She had traded her warrior leathers for a pair of faded jeans and an oversized hoodie, her sharp, predatory grace hidden beneath a deliberate, slouching gait. She worked at the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar on the edge of the docks where the light was dim and the patrons were too drunk or too tired to look anyone in the eye. Her name was no longer Kira, daughter of an alpha. She was just Kay, the quiet waitress with the cold eyes and the fast hands. Every morning, before the sun dared to peek through the smog, she applied the scent masker. The bitter paste was beginning to irritate her skin, leaving red, itchy patches on her neck and wrists, but she didn't care. It was the price of her soul. Hey, Kay, table 4 needs another round, the bartender barked, his voice grating against her sensitive ears. Kira nodded, her expression a mask of bored indifference. She moved through the crowded bar, her senses on high alert. Even here in the heart of the human realm, she felt the phantom tug of the bond. It was a dull ache in her chest, a constant reminder that somewhere out there, a king was tearing the world apart to find her. She was clearing a table when a group of men walked in. They didn't look like the usual dock workers. They moved with a synchronized, lethal precision that made the hair on the back of Kira's neck stand up. They were humans, but they wore the crisp, dark suits of a high-end security firm, the kind of firm that worked for people with more money than God. Or people with the power of a king. Kira kept her head down, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched them from the corner of her eye as she wiped down the sticky laminate of the table. They weren't drinking. They were scanning the room, their eyes lingering on every female with dark hair and a certain height. "Excuse me," one of them said, his voice smooth and professional as he approached her. He held up a high-resolution tablet. "We're looking for someone, a runaway. Have you seen this girl?" Kira glanced at the screen. It was a photo of her from a pack ceremony 2 years ago. She was wearing a dress she hated, her hair pinned back, but the defiance in her eyes was unmistakable. "Doesn't look familiar," Kira said, her voice a flat, bored monotone. She didn't look him in the eye. "Lots of girls come through here. Most of them are running from something. The man leaned in closer, his scent, expensive cologne and ozone, triggering a flash of memory. Kaelen. This man worked for Kaelen. The king had used his vast wealth to hire human mercenaries to do the legwork his trackers couldn't. She's special, the man persisted, his gaze narrowing. There's a very large reward for any information leading to her recovery. Good for her, Kira clipped, tossing the dirty rag into her plastic bin. But I just serve the beer. I don't keep track of the faces. She turned and walked away, her skin crawling with the sensation of his eyes on her back. She didn't go back to the bar. She walked straight into the kitchen, through the back door, and into the rain-slicked alleyway. She ran. Not with the wild, desperate speed of the forest, but with a calculated urban stealth. She doubled back through narrow passages, climbed over rusted fences, and eventually ducked into the basement apartment she called home. It was a cramped, damp space that smelled of mold and old pipes, but it was hers. She sat on the edge of her narrow cot, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls felt like they were closing in. Kaelen was closing in. He was using the humans, using their technology, using their greed to hunt her. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, a newspaper clipping she had found in the trash. It was a small article about the miraculous recovery of a struggling rural community near the Northwood. It spoke of new infrastructure, protected borders, and a sudden influx of resources. He was doing it. He was fixing her pack. He was being the alpha her father couldn't be. A tear escaped, hot and traitorous, sliding down her cheek. She wiped it away with a snarl. "It's a trap," she whispered to the empty room. "He's just building a bigger cage." But as she lay down, the cold dampness of the basement seeping into her bones, the ache in her chest flared, a sharp, insistent pull that told her the king was near. He was in the city, and he was never going to stop. The basement apartment felt like a tomb. Kira lay in the dark, her eyes wide, watching the shadows dance on the cracked ceiling. The ache in her chest wasn't just a dull throb anymore. It was a rhythmic, pulsing heat that synchronized with her own heartbeat. Kaelen was close. She could feel the weight of his aura pressing against the city's chaotic energy, a predator's shadow stretching over the concrete jungle. She knew she had to move again, but her body felt heavy, anchored by a sudden, crushing exhaustion. For weeks, she had been a ghost, but even ghosts get tired of haunting. The next morning, the city felt different. The air was unnaturally still, the usual morning fog clinging to the streets like a shroud. Kira walked to a nearby newsstand, her hood pulled low. She didn't need to buy a paper to see the headline. It was splashed across the front page of every local tabloid, accompanied by a grainy, high-altitude photo of the Northwood. "War at the border, rural pack lands under siege." The article was short, but every word was a dagger. It spoke of a massive, coordinated assault by the Shadow Claws. They weren't just raiding anymore, they were burning. The Crescent Pack was being pushed back to the very steps of the Alpha's hall. Her father was mentioned, a broken leader making a final, desperate stand. Kira's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the newsstand. She knew exactly what this was. Kaelen had stabilized the borders, yes, but he had also left a deliberate opening. He had created a vacuum that the Shadow Claws couldn't resist, and now he was waiting for her to see the consequences of her flight. "He's killing them," she whispered, the sound lost in the roar of a passing bus. "He's letting them die just to bring me home." The sass, the defiance, the warrior's pride, it all curdled into a sickening sense of responsibility. She had vowed to protect her pack, and here she was, hiding in a basement while her people bled. Kaelen wasn't just hunting her. He was holding her entire world hostage. She didn't go back to the apartment. She went to the bus station. The journey back to the border was a blur of gray highways and mounting dread. As the bus climbed into the foothills, the scent of the city faded, replaced by the familiar, heartbreaking smell of wood smoke and wet fur. But there was something else, the scent of blood. Lots of it. Kira stepped off the bus at a lonely crossroads, miles from the main pack entrance. She didn't shift. She couldn't risk the flare of energy that would alert Kaelen's trackers. She moved through the woods in her human form, her breath hitching as she saw the first signs of the devastation. Trees were charred, the earth torn up by the frantic movements of a battle. She reached the ridge overlooking the Crescent Pack Valley. Below, the village was in flames. She could see the Shadow Claw warriors, dark, hulking shapes moving through the smoke. But she also saw something else. A line of silver-clad warriors, Kaelen's elite guard, standing perfectly still on the opposite ridge. They weren't fighting. They were watching. "You monster!" Kira hissed, her eyes filling with tears of rage. "I prefer the term strategist." The voice was right behind her. Kira spun around, her hand flying to the small silver dagger she kept hidden in her boot. But she was too slow. Kaelen was standing there, looking as if he had just stepped out of a royal court rather than a war zone. He wasn't wearing his heavy furs. He was in a dark, form-fitting tactical suit that emphasized every line of his powerful frame. His gold eyes were calm, almost gentle as they swept over her disheveled appearance. "You came back," he said, his voice a low, satisfied purr. "You're letting them die!" Kira screamed, lunging at him with the dagger. Kaelen didn't even flinch. He caught her wrist in a grip of iron, his other hand snaking around her waist to pull her flush against him. The contact was like an electric shock, the mate bond exploding between them with a violence that made Kira's knees buckle. The scent of him, cedar, lightning, and pure, unadulterated power, overwhelmed her senses, drowning out the smell of the smoke. "I am protecting what is mine, Kira," Kaelen whispered into her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "I told you I would make this pack a home you were proud of. But I cannot do that if the queen is missing from her throne." He looked down at the burning village. With a single sharp whistle, he signaled his guards. In an instant, the silver line moved. They didn't just join the fight, they ended it. With a terrifying, synchronized efficiency, Kaelen's warriors descended into the valley, tearing through the shadow claws like a scythe through wheat. Kira watched, frozen in his arms as her pack was saved by the very male she had rejected. The irony was a bitter pill, but the feel of his heart beating against hers, steady and strong, was even worse. "You trapped me!" she gasped, her strength failing as the bond began to weave its seductive, terrifying web around her heart. "I gave you a reason to stop running," Kaelen corrected, his grip tightening possessively. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to look into the golden depths of his eyes. "The hunt is over, Kira. Now the rain begins." He didn't wait for her to answer. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her toward the waiting silver line. Kira tried to summon her sass, tried to find a cutting remark, but all she could feel was the overwhelming, terrifying sense of belonging. She had been caught, not by force, but by the very loyalty she had sworn to her pack. The Alpha King had won. The transition from the smoke-choked valley of the Crescent Pack to the Obsidian Citadel was a blur of motion and mounting dread. Kira didn't fight him, not because she had surrendered, but because the sheer proximity to Kaelen was doing something traitorous to her nervous system. Every time his chest brushed against her shoulder or his thumb grazed the skin of her waist, a wave of heat rolled through her, threatening to melt the icy resolve she had spent years building. When the heavy, iron-reinforced gates of the citadel finally groaned open, Kira was met with a sight that made her warrior's heart skip a beat. This wasn't a pack house. It was a fortress of glass and dark stone, perched precariously on the edge of a jagged mountain peak. Thousands of warriors stood in perfect formation in the courtyard, their silver armor gleaming under the moonlight. As Kaelen walked through them, still carrying her, they didn't just bow, they knelt. "Put me down, Kaelen," Kira hissed, her voice returning as the shock began to wear off. "I have legs. I'm a warrior, not a trophy." Kaelen looked down at her, a faint, amused smirk playing on his lips. "You are my mate, and until I am certain you won't bolt back into the woods the moment your feet touch the ground, you stay where I can feel your heart beating." He carried her through vaulted corridors lined with ancient tapestries and into a suite of rooms that defied everything Kira knew about werewolf life. There were no furs on the floor or rough-hewn timber walls. Instead, there was white marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the clouds, and a bed large enough to house an entire squad of warriors. He finally set her down in the center of the room. Kira immediately backed away, her hand going to her hip where her dagger used to be. It was gone, taken by Kaelen during the capture. "Welcome home, Kira," he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. He signaled to a group of female attendants waiting in the shadows. "Clean her, dress her, feed her. She is to be treated with the respect due to a queen, but she is not to leave these chambers without my express permission." "A queen?" Kira laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. "You mean a prisoner. You think because you saved my pack, I'm going to just fall into your bed and start picking out curtains? You don't know me at all." Kaelen stepped closer, his aura expanding until it filled every corner of the room. He didn't look angry. He looked fascinated. "I know you better than you know yourself. I know you hate this room because it represents the softness you've spent your life running from. I know you want to scream at me for outsmarting you. And I know." He paused, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating hum as he reached out to tuck a stray, mud-caked lock of hair behind her ear. "That your wolf is currently purring because I am finally close enough to touch." Kira flinched away from his hand, her eyes flashing. "My wolf is a warrior. She doesn't purr for tyrants." "We shall see," Kaelen murmured. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "By the way, your father has been settled into the guest wing of the lower citadel. He is being seen by my best healers. Your pack is safe, Kira. The shadow claws are no more. The price for that safety is your presence here. Don't make me increase the cost." The door clicked shut, and the sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place echoed like a gunshot. Kira spun around looking for an exit, a weapon, anything. She went to the window, but the drop was hundreds of feet of sheer rock. She was trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury she despised, and a male who seemed to see through every layer of her armor. The attendants approached, carrying silks and oils that smelled of jasmine and sandalwood. Kira bared her teeth at them, her sassy defiance flaring back to life. "If any of you touch me with that flowery garbage, I will break your fingers," she snapped. The women paused, looking at each other in confusion. They were used to submissive omegas or grateful mates. They weren't used to a mud-stained warrior who looked ready to kill them with a silk scarf. Kira sat on the edge of the massive bed, her jaw set. She looked at the opulent surroundings and felt a wave of nausea. Kaelen thought he had won. He thought he could buy her loyalty with the safety of her pack and her love with marble floors. "You want a queen, king?" she whispered to the empty room, her eyes narrowing with a dangerous, calculating light. "Fine. But I'm going to be the biggest nightmare you've ever invited into your palace." She wasn't running anymore. She was infiltrating. And if Kaelen wanted her in his court, he was going to learn that a cornered warrior is 10 times more dangerous than one on the run. The silk gown they eventually forced her into felt like a second skin of spiders. It was a deep midnight blue that matched the shadows of the citadel, clinging to her curves in a way that made Kira feel dangerously exposed. She paced the length of the marble balcony, her bare feet silent against the cold stone. The mountain air was thin and biting, but it was the only thing that felt real in this den of luxury. The heavy doors to her suite groaned open. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The air in the room suddenly felt pressurized, the scent of cedar and lightning thickening until she could taste it on her tongue. "The blue suits you," Kaelen said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and into her soles. "It matches the storm in your eyes." Kira turned, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Kaelen had shed his tactical gear for a simple black tunic, the top buttons undone to reveal the corded muscles of his neck and the faint silver scar that ran across his collarbone. He looked less like a king and more like a man, a very dangerous, very beautiful man. "I look like a doll," Kira snapped, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "Is that what you wanted? To dress me up and put me on a shelf while you play hero with my pack?" Kaelen walked toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't stop until he was inches away, his heat radiating off him in waves. "I don't want a doll, Kira. I want a partner. I want the female who tore through a dozen shadow claws without blinking. I want the warrior who had the audacity to tell the Alpha King to go to hell." "Then give me back my leathers and my blade," she challenged, tilting her chin up. "Because this girl in the silk? She's a ghost, and she's going to haunt you until you let her go." Kaelen reached out, his fingers ghosting over the line of her jaw. Kira tried to flinch away, but the mate bond chose that moment to strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity surged through her, pinning her in place. Her breath hitched, her pupils dilating until the world was nothing but the gold of his eyes. "You think the bond is a chain," Kaelen whispered, his voice dropping to a raw, intimate thread. "You think it's what made your father weak. But look at me, Kira. Do I look weak to you?" He took her hand, pressing it against his chest. Beneath the thin fabric of his tunic, his heart was thundering. Not with fear, but with a violent, rhythmic power. "This bond isn't a cage. It's an amplifier. When I found you at the border, my strength didn't diminish. It doubled. My wolf didn't want to submit. He wanted to conquer the world just to give it to you." Kira tried to pull her hand away, but her fingers betrayed her, curling into the fabric of his shirt. The scent of him was everywhere now, drowning out her logic, her vows, her very identity. "It's a lie," she gasped, her voice trembling. "It's just biology. It's just a trick of the moon." "Is it?" Kaelen leaned in, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear. "Then why is your heart racing in sync with mine? Why is your wolf screaming for me to stop talking and just take what belongs to me?" He moved his hand to the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. The contact was explosive. Kira's head fell back, a soft, traitorous moan escaping her lips as his mouth found the sensitive skin of her neck. She felt his teeth graze her pulse point, a silent promise of a mark, a claim that would be eternal. For a moment, the warrior vanished. The sassy, defiant girl who had run across continents was replaced by a female who was finally, terrifyingly, home. She reached up, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer as she sought the heat of his mouth. The kiss was a war. It was a collision of two alphas, a desperate, hungry exchange of power and passion that left them both breathless. It was the truth she had been running from, laid bare in the darkness of the citadel. But as Kaelen pulled back, his eyes dark with a possessive fire, a frantic pounding echoed from the outer doors. "Sire!" Silas's voice was urgent, stripped of its usual composure. The shadow claws? They didn't retreat. They were a distraction. A second, larger force has bypassed the Northwood. They're at the gates of the Crescent Pack house. They're burning everything. The spell broke. Kira shoved Kaelen away, her eyes wide with horror. The heat of the kiss turned to ice in her veins. "You said they were gone," she whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of rage. "You said they were safe." Kaelen's expression shifted instantly, the lover vanishing and the king returning, cold and lethal. "They should have been. My scouts reported no other movements." "Your scouts were wrong!" Kira screamed, already tearing at the silk gown, looking for her hidden cache of weapons. "They're dying because of your games, because you wanted to keep me here in this prison." Kaelen grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm. "Kira, stay here. I will handle this." "No!" she snarled, ripping herself free. She looked him dead in the eye, the sassy warrior back in full force. But this time, she wasn't running from him. She was running with him. "You want a queen? Then get me my armor. Because if my pack falls tonight, I'm taking your throne with it." The silk gown lay in a heap of midnight blue on the marble floor, a discarded skin of a life Kira refused to lead. In its place, she donned the heavy, reinforced leathers of the obsidian guard, the dark material cool and familiar against her skin. Kaelen stood by the armory doors, his eyes tracking every movement of her hands as she strapped her twin silver daggers to her thighs. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply handed her a cloak bearing his crest, a gesture of protection she finally accepted. "We fly by the ridge," Kaelen commanded, his voice a low, vibrating hum of war. "The Shadow Claws think they've found a blind spot. They're about to realize they've walked into a slaughterhouse." The journey back to the Crescent Packlands was a blur of adrenaline and moonlight. They didn't take the roads. They moved through the mountain passes like a storm. Kira rode at Kaelen's side, her wolf and his in perfect, silent synchronization. The bond, once a terrifying chain, was now a live wire of shared intent. She could feel his tactical mind mapping the battlefield, and he could feel her fierce, protective fire. As they crested the final ridge, the valley below was a vision of hell. The Crescent Pack house was surrounded by a sea of dark fur and flickering torches. The Shadow Claws had returned in force, led by a massive, scarred Alpha who was currently battering down the main gates. "My father," Kira gasped, her eyes searching the chaos. She saw him, Alpha Valerius, standing on the balcony, his sword drawn, a shadow of his former self but standing tall for the first time in years. "He's holding the line, Kira," Kaelen said, his hand finding hers for a brief, crushing second. "Now we break theirs." Kaelen shifted mid-leap, a massive midnight black wolf that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Kira followed, her silver-gray form a streak of lightning beside him. They hit the Shadow Claw rear flank like a physical explosion. The battle was a symphony of carnage. Kira fought with a ferocity that even Kaelen's elite guard watched with awe. She wasn't just a warrior, she was a force of nature. She moved through the enemy ranks, her daggers a blur, her sassy defiance transformed into a lethal, focused rage. Beside her, Kaelen was a god of war, his sheer power clearing paths through the enemy as if they were made of straw. In the heat of the fray, Kira found herself cornered by 3 Shadow Claw lieutenants. They were large, brutal, and smelled of old blood. She took a defensive stance, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her silver fur stained crimson. "The Alpha's bitch is ours!" one of them snarled, lunging forward. Before he could reach her, a wall of black fur slammed into him. Kaelen was there, his jaws snapping the lieutenant's neck with a sickening crunch. He stood over Kira, his hackles raised, a low, earth-shaking growl vibrating in his chest. He didn't move to take over her fight. He stood as her shield, his presence giving her the opening she needed. Kira didn't hesitate. She lunged at the remaining two, her movements fluid and precise. She took them down in seconds, her heart hammering not with fear, but with the exhilarating realization that she wasn't alone. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to be the only shield. As the last of the shadow claws began to flee into the woods, Kira shifted back, her body bruised and bloodied, but her spirit soaring. She looked up at the balcony where her father stood, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pride. He looked at her, then at the massive black wolf standing protectively beside her, and he bowed, not out of fear, but out of respect for the alpha pair they had become. Kaelen shifted back, his chest heaving, his gold eyes searching hers. He walked toward her, ignoring the cheers of the surviving Crescent warriors. Covered her up with a cloak. He stopped inches away, his scent, cedar, lightning, and now the metallic tang of victory, wrapping around her like his cloak. "You fought like a queen," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. Kira father threw an extra cloak for the Alpha King to cover it up. Kira looked at him, the last of her defenses crumbling. She saw the male who had hunted her, trapped her, and obsessed over her. But she also saw the male who had stood in the mud with her, who had respected her strength, and who had saved her people without hesitation. "I fought like a mate," she corrected, her voice a soft, defiant thread. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the mark on his shoulder where a shadow claw had grazed him. She didn't pull away when he leaned into her touch. She didn't run when he pulled her into his arms. "I still think you're an arrogant, possessive jerk," she whispered against his chest, her sass returning even as she melted into his heat. Kaelen laughed, a deep, rich sound that echoed through the quieted valley. "And I think you're the most troublesome, defiant female I've ever had the misfortune of loving." He tilted her head back, his eyes locking onto hers with a promise that was no longer a threat. "The hunt is over, Kira, truly over." "Good," she murmured, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of copper and victory. "Because I'm tired of running. I think it's time I started ruling." The smoke from the final skirmish began to lift, revealing a valley that was no longer a graveyard, but a birthplace. The Crescent Pack warriors, once hollow-eyed and defeated, stood tall among the ruins, their gazes fixed on the two figures standing at the center of the clearing. Kira and Kaelen, both blood-stained and weary, looked less like a king and his captive, and more like the two halves of a single, unstoppable soul. Kira's father, Alpha Valerius, descended the steps of the pack house. His gait was still slow, but the shadow of grief that had haunted him for years had finally begun to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, humble clarity. He stopped before Kira, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I spent so long mourning the mate I lost that I forgot to protect the daughter I had," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to Kaelen, inclining his head in a deep, sincere sign of respect. "You didn't just save our lives, King Kaelen. You saved our spirit. My daughter was right, I was weak, but she has found a strength I never knew existed." Kira stepped forward, taking her father's hand. "We both found it, Father. Strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing who is worth standing with." Kaelen placed a possessive yet supportive hand on the small of Kira's back. "The Crescent Pack will remain an independent territory," he announced, his voice carrying to every ear in the valley. "But it will be under the eternal protection of the Obsidian Throne. Your warriors will be trained by my elite, your borders will be reinforced, and your alpha will have a seat at my high council." A cheer erupted from the pack, a sound of pure, unadulterated hope that echoed off the mountain peaks. 1 month later, the Obsidian Citadel was transformed. The cold, sterile marble was now draped in the silver and green banners of the Crescent Pack, a public declaration of the union between the two territories. The Great Hall was packed with alphas from across the continent, all gathered to witness the formal claiming of the Alpha King's mate. Kira stood before the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of her suite, looking out at the clouds. She was wearing a gown of liquid silver, designed to look like armor, with a high collar and a sweeping train. She looked every bit the queen, but she still had her twin silver daggers strapped to her thighs beneath the silk. Still planning an escape? Kaelen's voice was a warm caress against her neck. He stepped into the room, looking devastatingly handsome in his royal leathers. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Kira leaned back into his heat, a small, sassy smile playing on her lips. I was thinking about it. The human realm has better coffee, you know? Kaelen chuckled, his chest vibrating against her back. I'll have a shipment brought in every week. Just stay where I can see you. I'm not going anywhere, Kaelen, she whispered, turning in his arms to face him. She reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. You were right about the bond. It's not a cage. It's a choice. And I choose you. Every day. Even when you're being an arrogant, overbearing king. And I choose the sassy warrior who tried to stab me, Kaelen replied, his gold eyes burning with a love that was no longer a hunt, but a sanctuary. They walked into the great hall together, hand in hand. The room fell silent as they approached the dual thrones. Kaelen didn't sit first. He waited for Kira to take her place, acknowledging her as his equal in every sense of the word. The ceremony was brief but powerful. As Kaelen leaned in to finally place his mark on her neck, a permanent, glowing brand of the fated mate bond, Kira didn't flinch. She welcomed the sting, the heat, and the sudden overwhelming flood of his soul into hers. When she marked him in return, her teeth sinking into his shoulder with a warrior's precision, the bond was sealed. The Alpha King and his queen stood before their people, a balance of power and passion, of steel and silk. The hunt was over, the war was won, and the girl who vowed never to have a mate had found something far more powerful, a partner who made her stronger, a love that made her whole, and a kingdom that was finally, truly, home. As the celebration began, Kira leaned toward Kaelen, her eyes sparkling with that familiar, defiant fire. Don't get too comfortable on that throne, King. I still expect a sparring match tomorrow morning. And I don't plan on losing. Kaelen grinned, pulling her close for a kiss that promised a lifetime of beautiful, sassy trouble. I wouldn't have it any other way, my queen. And so, the warrior who ran from her destiny became the queen who defined it. Kira and Kaelen's story is a testament that love isn't a weakness. It's the ultimate weapon. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this tale of fated mates and fierce alphas, don't forget to like, comment your favorite moment, and stay tuned for our next supernatural romance. Until next time, keep the moon in your heart.